I'm going to introduce to you our speaker, our illustrious head of school, Gu Salsa, who's in his 11th and final year, sadly, at Lawrence, but we are very excited to have Doug Hamilton, who's also here today, our future head of school, leading me at the end. Gu holds his bachelor's degree in education from the University of Massachusetts, his master's degree from Harvard's Graduate School of Education. He started his career in 1973 in public education, first in Philadelphia, which is a little hard, and then as an assistant principal in Massachusetts. He then served in various positions over 13 years at the Landmark School, and then served for 11 years as head of school for Asset School, a school for gifted, dyslexic, and gifted dyslexic learners in Honolulu before joining us in Cleveland. He also currently serves as a trustee for the Ohio Association of Independent Schools, the Cleveland Council of Independent Schools, and he's served on various boards in the past, including Harvard's Principal Center, and he's also been an educational consultant to the School Function Program at Boston Children's Hospital's Department of Ambulatory Pediatrics. The Schaefer Center is incredibly honored to have you here share his observations as an educator, administrator, mentor to students, and parents of students who learn differences. So please join me in welcoming Gu Salsa. All right.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Christian. I told Kelly when I saw the title of this talk, I know we agreed on this a long time ago, but I changed my mind a lot. And I don't do time well. I have no concept of time. And I don't follow outlines. And when I saw the title of this talk, I thought, you know, my blog used to be called Confessions of a Lunch Pail Headmaster, because I always found myself in situations where I had to admit that I didn't know something or I needed to learn something about what our work was. So I thought this morning we should just call it Harmless Musings of a Lunch Pail Headmaster. And Kelly's role really is to keep me on track, on time, and responsive to what we really need to be talking about here. So let's start with the quiz.
All right, thank you. So far we've had 18 responses, and Lou, I might have to have you do this right there. All right. So for anyone who took the quiz, every single response was false, okay? So everything that we asked you was a neuromyth, or considered a myth around neurological research and how it impacts learning and education. Okay, so just looking at some of the things that are most missed, we'll find some of us are left brain, some of us are right brain. That helps explain differences in how we learn.
So here's the bottom line here. Let's be careful about brain scams.
Yes.
Right? So anytime we put a diagram of a brain with any kind of an article, people pay way more attention to that article, whether or not the brain illustration has anything whatever to do with what the article's about. It's just something that happens. We associate a lot of authority with those images of fMRIs and so forth. But if you really saw what that fMRI is made of, it's made of sheets and sheets of digits that then get, you know, sort of amalgamated into these color areas. As a school head, I got to tell you that I'm often asked by parents, why doesn't Lawrence use fast forward? Why doesn't Lawrence use CogMed? Why doesn't Lawrence give all the kids blue-green algae in their lunchbox? Because, you know, there's articles about how this will help ADHD and so forth. And I got to tell you, as a head of school, what I tell parents is, look, we know that in order to teach a child to read, particularly one who's struggling, and we'll get to why they struggle in a second, the program has to be structured, it has to be systematic, it has to be hierarchical, and it has to be multi-sensory. That doesn't mean kids have a learning style that's either auditory or visual. It just means if you present information visually and auditorily at the same time, that you're having kids move or trace something in the air or in a sand table like Maria Montessori did way back in the early 1900s. We have portable sand tables here at Lawrence that you can see. But as long as you're doing that, we know that that works, and we know that it takes time, and we know it takes a trained teacher, and it takes a motivated kid to do that. These other things simply don't have what I consider the gold standard of research, which is time on task, a sufficient end group. Some of these studies that are published have 12 kids in the study. I mean, you just simply can't draw conclusions about a study that publishes the results on 12 kids. And then I think it's really important that we have data. I want data. I want to know this is the way we should spend our tuition dollars. This is how we should spend the time. So for me, it's time and resources, and if we don't have a research base, if it doesn't sing to me that this is what we ought to be doing, then I want to stick with what we know works.
And I think the reason why we did this survey is not because we wanted to tell you all like, oh, look what you don't know, right? Like, you guys are experts in education. You're here because you know a lot about how kids learn. You know a lot about the research on providing intervention services to children, right? But these are common misconceptions, right? They're just part of our zeitgeist. It's in the water, and we pick them up. For example, like, we use 10% of our brain. All of us have probably heard this, or I used to see it on a poster all the time when I was writing the T in Boston, and it drove me nuts between Harvard and MIT. I see the signs and use only 10% of my brain. I'm like, why is this on here? Right? Filtering into like the consciousness of everyone that's trained. So like, the reason why we're doing this is because educators, even with a solid understanding of learning, they buy into these misconceptions. And the reason why we buy into them is because we're often biased by neurological research. We hear neuro and we think, ooh, this must have science involved, right? We're often looking for simple answers, simple solutions. I would absolutely love to know, okay, I am left brain, great. This is my career path and this is what I do. But our brains are way more complex than just left brain, right brain. We use every part of our brain, and we use it changes all the time. So,
well, according to my wife, I am only using 10%. And if you hang around Harvard and MIT, it's really interesting. You go to the grocery store in Kenmore Square, and there'll be some clerk there at the express line that says 10 items or less, and someone will be like piling 15 or 20 things on the counter, and the clerk will say, either you go to MIT and you can't read, or you go to Harvard and you can't count. But I think Kelly's right. We tend to jump to these conclusions, and they can do a lot of damage. But the thing we have to understand, at least I try every time I hear one of these things, is that there's a mom who's desperate to find a simple, single solution to a complex, thorny problem. And so, maybe she's heard that if I get the right overlay or colored lens, my child who's been struggling to learn how to read will suddenly find reading easy. And, it's really important to make sure you understand, I think, that moms need to find solutions for their kids. And we can't make them feel silly or stupid when they're doing that. I think what we need to do is keep reinforcing what's really going to float the boat in the midst of all this other noise that's out there. We'll get to my own prejudices and beliefs about this. But before we do, I just want to say a couple of things. Many of us are friends, colleagues of Ethan Schaefer. Many of you in this room knew him. His spirit still enlightens, and inspires us here at the school. And his motto, no matter what they write on the letterhead here, his motto was instigate, agitate, and dominate. And I hope we can keep that spirit alive when we're talking about this end of the industry for these kids who are so poorly served by our independent and our public schools. And part of it is the design. We're going to get into a little bit of that today.
Yes.
Part of that is sort of the design of these places. But I also want to always remember that behind everything is a mom or a dad who's desperate to find a solution for their child. And we need to be respectful, we need to honor that, and we need to speak to that in a way that just reinforces, here's what we know works, here's what the data tells us, here's what our history and our programs tell us. I also just wanted to thank all the people in this room. Starting in June 2018, Vanessa's back there, she's our associate head of school and runs the lower school. Doug is our headmaster-elect, just announced on Monday. Bill Musoff, our dean of students. Kelly and Renee and the whole group of staff here. I just wanted to put you on notice that starting in June, I am going to stop taking credit for all the stuff you guys do. And I don't have much time left. I was in, Jason Sepsi is our art teacher and technology director, and he's teaching next door. And I was in his room. Actually, Doug, I was touring around your competition. One of the finalists in the head search. And of course, kids are so smart, even the little ones, you know, they pick up on stuff right away. So I was touring this finalist around, and one of our little second graders said, Mr. Salza, looked up from his project, Mr. Salza, are you overtired yet? So I thought we should do this talk early in the year before I get really overtired. Because I'm getting close to that. All right, so any other thoughts about neuromyths? This is something we could spend hours on. But I hope we all understand. And this is a part of a much longer quiz, right?
Oh, yes, yes. There's been an effort to talk about how neuromyths have been pervasive in education system across the globe. So in Europe and in Asia, there's a 32 question quiz that's been developed, respective of their different, social norms. But some of the main ones still remain, like learning styles, left-right brain, research, movement as a catalyst for learning, sugar as a reason for why kids have poor attention, and the 10% of our brain. That's on every single survey in the US, in the UK, in Austria, and in this Asia version as well. And so if you're interested, I think Cynthia's the first name, McDonald is the last name of the author.
I have
that
it
published the
cited.
American version.
I put the citation on the survey, so if you go back to that link,
Yes.
it should be on there. If you guys
Yep.
want to look.
See how efficient people are around
Yes.
here? I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they compare results within the general education, folks with a neuroscience background who also endorse a lot of these as true when really they're false, and the general public who overwhelmingly endorsed the learning-related brain myths. So it's fairly interesting.
Great.
Yeah.
All right.
So I'm hoping we can move then our conversation to school design and talk about, since we really want to emphasize that schools are using the best use of their time and resources. So if we could discuss how school design might impact students, especially students who are learning differences, I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
Let's see what's next. So I love Mark Twain. And I think this quotation is important because we think we know a lot of stuff that we don't really know. And in particular, when I think about school design, I accuse schools of being broken, but they're not really broken. They're actually designed to do exactly what they do. And they were designed 150 years ago, 100 years ago. So we're dealing with an obsolete model. We're dealing with a model where we are creating kids who will take their coffee break at the same time everybody else takes their coffee break. We're designing an education where everyone will be at lunch at the same time, and they're going to have the same thing for lunch that everybody else has. It's an industrial model. It worked really well back in my dad's day. If he graduated from high school, he would have graduated around 1938. Born in 1918. I graduated high school in 1968, and my daughter Leah graduated in 1993. I was the assistant principal in her high school. She graduated. But if you took my dad and you transplanted him into Leah's high school, he would have known exactly what to do. It was the same 6 periods a day, the bells rang, he moved. He wouldn't have known about some of the cool technology that was around. But really, the whole purpose of the thing, being on time, doing everything at the same time, we've stitched mastery to time together in a way in American education that does not serve children well. And it drives teachers crazy. We just showed a TED Talk, Sal Khan, talking about the fact that whether or not a kid masters all the mathematics they're supposed to master in the 2nd grade, they get moved to the 3rd grade, and it doesn't matter if they only know 75% of what they're supposed to know. We continue to build on that faulty foundation. So, what is it that we know, we think we know, that Mark Twain is kind of warning us about that we should be looking at? So, I'm really concerned about anybody who has a print challenge. I was asked by kids here a couple of years ago, Mr. Salza, don't you have a learning disability? I said, no, I don't have a learning disability, I have dyslexia. Dyslexia means that print challenges me. I can read about 100 words a minute if I eye read. But if I ear read and I eye read together, and we have wonderful devices now that do this, my phone does it, my computer does it, my iPad does it, my reading rate goes up to 350 words a minute. And it sounds, my wife says it sounds like the Chipmunks to her. But to me, it's, I don't have to do the phonological processing anymore. But we know that all struggling readers, and this is research that goes back 35 or 40 years to Charles Perfetti, I think at the University of Chicago. We know that these kids have weak word recognition, they have memory deficits across domains, especially for processing and the retrieval of linguistic material, and there are often speech delays, speech and language delays in their background.
Can I ask, is this available for us?
Yeah, we'll figure that out, right? We'll put a link on the,
Okay,
yeah,
good.
sure. But here's the deal, when we talk about school design. You take this kid who's having these struggles, and you impose time limits on them, right? And we make assumptions. First of all, the time limits exacerbate the situation. Anytime we put time limits on us to do something, we get nervous. But we also draw conclusions about the kids and say, kid can't read. Must be, must be kind of stupid. Someone told me once that all of us in schools divide kids into 3 groups. And this is Massachusetts, so you're going to have to forgive me. Wicked smart, kind of smart, and kind of dumb. And when you have a problem with reading, at least in the schools I went to in Massachusetts, people thought you were kind of dumb. Now, no one ever said that to me, but I felt that way because everyone else operated this way. And the pernicious thing is we usually say to those kids,
Work harder.
Work harder,
Yeah.
try harder. You're not putting enough effort into your work. And that is not the case at all. These kids are trying really hard, and their results simply don't show it. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but this goes back to the 80s. And I mean, here's the thing, you know, I was talking with Dave and some other people in the room. When you've been hanging around a long time, you keep seeing stuff come back with a new label or a new thing. You know, Erlen lenses are now called chromatic something or others. But, you know, here's what we do in school. We read stuff, right? We make kids read stuff. We read and talk about things. We give kids lectures, and sometimes we put up a screen where they see a visual referent for what we're talking about. We do demonstrations, and we maybe read or lecture or talk about something, and then we practice something. And I thought I'd take a minute and let you think about how do you learn, you know, and how do you teach, and what do you think the most efficient way to have kids learn in your classroom is? You know, might these two things, for example, who learns something different the way they teach it, if you're a teacher? Or, you know, are these the same? I've often seen people do things precisely the way they were taught to do them without paying attention to their kids. And, you know, the interesting thing is that what we're going to see is that the most efficient way to help kids learn anything is to do one of these things and then give them an opportunity to practice and give them feedback on the practice. I mean, we've known this for decades. And the way you give feedback and the way you do this strategy is that you give kids a chance to teach something back to a partner. You do think, pair, share activities. Cornell note-taking is something we use here at the school, where you have kids do a written summary, but you make sure they do a recitation of what they're trying to do. And then I was going to give you this quiz, and I was going to grade you on it and see, you know, impose time limits and so forth. But, you know, what would you say are percentages of retention for each of these different strategies for teaching kids? If you read something silently on your own, and then 2 weeks later you take a quiz on it, what percentage of that material do you think the average person would remember? Yeah, it's about 10%. And I'll show you the answers. Here's how it breaks down. And this is where we get confused about learning styles. And that was one of the modality questions we asked before, right? So if you notice, all you have to do is combine two of these and you get a big bump in efficiency, right? So if you read something and discuss it, it goes from 10 to 70% retained information. And of course, the best way to do anything in our schools is to do what? Practice and give people feedback on the practice. And when you do that, this information is retained over a long period of time. And here's my deal. You know, we hire a lot of consultants to come in and talk to our schools. You know what the definition of a consultant is on the website despair.com? Have you ever been to despair.com? Despair.com is one of these anti-inspirational poster places. You know, so instead of having the eagle soaring, you know, or you know, my favorite one is a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. You've seen those posters, right? Well, at despair.com, that same poster has a grizzly bear about to clamp on a salmon that's jumping, right? And this salmon's life is about to end. And the caption is, sometimes a journey of 1,000 miles ends very, very badly. Anyway, consultants on despair.com are defined as, you know, there's a nice little poster, there's shadowy figures around a round table, and they're all deep in thought. It says, consultants, if you can't be part of the solution, there's damn good money to be made in prolonging the problem. This stuff is in every single second-year teacher's toolbox. This is not something you have to hire a consultant to come in and tell you. This is something we know. This is not something you have to do a lot of research on. It's very easy to find the data on this. And what it tells us is that our schools need to give kids ample opportunities to have different strategies presented to them, not because they are auditory learners, not because they're visual learners, but because our brains are designed to take in information in a bunch of different ways, take advantage of that, make sure that our schools are designed to give kids those opportunities. What am I forgetting?
Well, I thought it might be helpful if you could talk a little bit about this concept that schools are meant to prepare kids for the real world. Because in particular, I feel like when we're working with students with a learning difference of any type, those are students that we're really hoping, okay, you are going to succeed, we're going to launch you into adulthood, and we have to hurry up quickly and fix what this problem is to get you there. So if you could comment on...
Well, I have a beef about that, yeah.
Okay.
I
I'd like to hear your thoughts.
All right. So in school, we separate kids from one another based on our perceptions of their achievement levels. So we isolate them in these groups. And I think it does a lot of damage because they draw conclusions about themselves, positive and negative, that really have no basis in reality. So we isolate kids from one another. Then we isolate the mind from their hands. We don't give them an apple. Sometimes we don't even give them a picture of an apple. We just say A-P-P-L-E, apple. And a kid's supposed to fill in the blanks there. So we separate mind from hands, and then we separate school from reality. And, you know, this is the sort of classroom my father probably went to back in the, you know, the early 20th century. And, you know, the caption on the picture is, well, what's changed? Well, not much, really, when you think about it. I mean, the two institutions that have changed so little, as we look back over the decades, are the prison system and high schools. And I'm not trying to be glib about this, I'm trying to be factual. I mean, high schools really haven't changed that much. Do you know where the Carnegie unit comes from? 120 hours is one Carnegie unit, right? 120 hours of seat time instruction. Where does that come from? It came from the Carnegie Commission, 1904. 1904. We're in the 21st century now. And later on I'll show you a picture of the mastery transcript that Scott Looney at Hawken was leading a national conversation among independent schools to try to change that 1904 model into something that works a little bit better for our kids and talks about who they are in a much more comprehensive kind of a way. Okay, so here's another beef that I have. Anybody know what these pillars are? These are real pillars, by the way. These are beautiful marble pillars. So this, I took this picture in the National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. And there are 24 of these pillars there, right? And I swear to God, this is true. In the 1800s, they held up the eastern portico of the Capitol building. And then they did that, in fact, it was during Lincoln's administration, right, if you look at the pictures of his second inaugural, you can see them working on the Capitol building. But they took all those pillars that held up the portico, and they transported them into the woods, and they erected them at the Arboretum. So they used to hold up a portico of the Capitol. Now what do they hold up? Nothing. I took the liberty of labeling 4 of them. And so this is school design now, right? This is the things we all do, maybe so because we've always done it. But we We force kids to memorize stuff. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we're struggling with at Lawrence is the way we teach multiplication. We don't teach multiplication in a way that helps kids with quantity. We don't teach multiplication generally in a way that helps them subitize, which is to understand quantity immediately. We rather have them memorize the times tables, which is kind of like having them learn 181 names of countries and then 181 of their capitals. Because that's all it is. It's a language retrieval issue. And that's how we teach multiplication. So we make kids memorize a lot of useless stuff. The other thing we do is we tell them, you get good grades, you're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. And of course, our grading system is, how do I put this? It's a lie. It is a lie. And I don't care how carefully you try to do it. I don't care how much time you put into trying to be objective. It's a lie. It's a lie. I can give you many, many examples of how grading is just a bunch of lies. And our parents buy it, our kids buy it, we buy it, colleges buy it, and it's all really nothing but horse feathers. You know, I can give you an example of two kids, they both get a quiz. Let's call them 7th graders. One's named Earl, one's named Anthony. Earl gets the 20 questions on the vocabulary list. He looks at it on Friday. He knows he's going to have a quiz on Friday. He looks at all those words and he realizes, I know all these words. Tosses the thing in his locker, closes the locker, doesn't even think about it, right? Next week comes along, he takes the quiz, he's able to define the words, he spells them correctly, he uses them in a sentence, he gets 19 out of 20 correct. Anthony, on the other hand, looks at this, he can't even pronounce the words on the sheet. So he does what his learning specialist has taught him to do. He looks up the words in the dictionary. By the way, that is not the way to learn vocabulary. We make kids look stuff up in the dictionary, use electronic, that's not how they learn vocabulary. But that's what he does. And he writes the words repeatedly. That actually does help with spelling and so forth. Writes the words repeatedly. Has his mother quiz him on Wednesday. He gets like 12 of them right. He knew none of them at the beginning of this thing. But he takes the quiz on Friday. He gets 10 correct. What does Earl get? A. He got 19, right? This guy, Anthony, learns 10 of these words. He gets 10 correct out of 20, but what's his grade? It's an F. How long is Anthony going to keep doing this? He's going to toss in the towel. You know, if he starts in the 5th grade, by the time he's in 7th grade, he's done with us. He's on to other things. Hopefully it's Lego Logo and Minecraft. But it could be other stuff. Could be other stuff. But he'll figure something out. Timed high-stakes tests. You know what Yogi Berra said about our infatuation with high-stakes testing? He said, we're lost, but we're making good time. That's high-stakes testing. That's what we're doing. We're convincing our public that this is what tells us how we're doing in our educational systems. And then my favorite pet peeve, tons of homework. And let me tell you, our independent schools are guilty as charged on this. And I don't know why we can't read the research and we can't give our families and our kids a break. And I don't know, dope slap those parents who think that this is some kind of measure of rigor, that their kids are spending 3.5 or 4 hours doing useless homework every night. Yeah?
I a long time ago heard and read this, and it really stuck with me, is that why do people go into teaching? Because they did really good at learning the way they were taught. And so they propagate the same methodology because they were successful at it.
That could be true. I know that I talk to a lot of teachers who really want their kids to do very, very well. And you know, so here's the thing. There is integrity and resistance. So somebody who grew up doing a lot of homework and loving it and feeling like it contributed to them, because we had a debate about homework at Lawrence. I don't know, do you remember that debate, Doug? I mean, there was blood on the floor in this thing. It took 3 years because we somehow think that homework teaches responsibility. Well, no, it doesn't. It actually teaches the opposite. It teaches you how to get around stuff. Homework makes you an independent learner. Man, if I had a buck for every time I heard someone say that what we want to do is create independent learners in school, I would have retired a long time ago. Actually, Vygotsky taught us there's no such thing as an independent learner. All learning is socially mediated. You learn because you have a relationship with somebody. Because someone's looking at you and is concerned about you learning this thing. When you're a little baby, they're, trying to get you illicit language and so forth. Performance is sometimes independent. If you become a ballerina, you're going to go out there and do this by yourself, or you're going to perform on an instrument, or you're going to swim in a meet. But learning is socially mediated. So homework really doesn't do many of the things we say it does. But if a teacher believes that and wants to do right by their kids, they're probably going to continue to do it until they're forced to get in a room with, some crazy head of school who says what we're doing with homework is not right. And we have to change our policy to meet a philosophy and implement a practice that meets the needs of those kids that we have in our school. These kids who are having these kinds of struggles. And every school has to have that conversation. And I can't have it for you. I can just tell you what we're doing right now is killing kids, killing families. I'm surprised it hasn't killed us in the schools. And I think a lot of teachers can't even keep up with the grading on the homework that they give. So kids are not getting timely feedback on that stuff.
And Lou.
Why did I put this slide up?
Yeah.
Because our schools give a very invidious but implicit message to kids. Do what I say, when I say, how I say, or we will hurt you. Or we will hurt you. That's what grading is. It's basically the coin of the realm, right? We hurt kids with grades and so forth. But I think, this is one of my favorite cartoons because this is basically what we tell kids. We want you to do these wonderful, imaginative, creative things, but you better do everything the way I say every day and don't make trouble for us at the school. And confusing competence and learning with compliance is a disservice to all of us. It's a disservice to our country. It's certainly a disservice to the individuals in that place. Okay, where are we?
Yes. So why don't we talk a little bit about how educators and parents can support students, all students, but particular students with learning differences in the classroom so that they can develop resiliency, agency. Right? A lot of us are not denying that, okay, kids need accommodations or interventions or specialized education, but access to those things seems to be a real pickup.
Do I know anything about this?
Perhaps,
Okay.
I hope so. I would scoot past this.
So let's look at this whole thing about.
Yeah, because we got like 2 minutes.
All right, equality and equity. All right, so
Yeah, talk about that.
this is obvious to us, right? We know what's going on in these photographs, right? So we want to treat everybody equally, but that really doesn't serve kids well at all. Because the little guy can't see what's going on beyond that fence. And the kid who's sort of standing on the box and just making it, without that box there, he'd be stuck. He would not be able to see a thing. And the tall kid doesn't need anything under his feet to see over the fence. And so we now understand that accommodating kids based on their individual needs is the right thing to do. And equality needs to give way to equity, and we need to be more equitable in the way we design these things. So here's the deal. Now, the tall guy gets to see the baseball game, the medium height kid gets to see what's going on, and the short kid now finally can see what's over the fence and enjoy the game. But the problem is that we have to spend how much money getting an evaluation these days?
I mean,
Psycho ed?
it depends. It
Well,
could be anywhere.
if you come to the Schaefer Center, you get a bargain, I know that.
Yes, but sometimes they can be up to like $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, right?
You know,
It's expensive.
in Boston, for sure, $3,000, $4,000. And then you get a report, and it doesn't matter which of the 50 states you get the report in. If you go to another state that you didn't get that report in, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing in that state that it meant in the state you got it. And this has been true for 50 years. 50 years. It isn't even true county to county within the same state. So you can be in Fairfax County, Maryland, and go to Montgomery County, and your Fairfax eligibility doesn't cut it there. It's ridiculous. Deborah Weber says, why are we doing this at Boston Children's Hospital? She said, we should just simply give kids what we know they need right away without having to go through this eligibility problem. But this is like my Whiskey Tango Foxtrot moment, you know, like WTF. Why do we have a fence there? Why the fence? Oh, you thought it meant something else. Jill, come on, this is elementary school. We got kids all over the place here. Don't even think that stuff. But here's my point. We design our school with all these barriers that aren't good for anybody. I mean, the time limits that we impose on kids, particularly in our public and private schools, they're arbitrary, they're capricious, and they're damaging. And they don't need to be there for anybody. And wouldn't it be a much better place if we could be a little bit more authentic about the way we're designing those things? And I think this is really important because I've shown this slides to teachers at Hawken, I've shown it to teachers at US and Laurel, and I ask them, how many of you use an alarm clock? And all the hands will go up, and then I'll say, okay, how long have you been using an alarm clock? Is it more than 6 or 12 months or 18 months? And they'll say, well, yeah. And then I'll say, well, how are your independent wake-up skills coming along? So the technology we use and we allow in our schools, and you guys have to write reports that recommend to educators and parents the stuff that kids need to do, has more to do with their social perception than they do with their utility in the classroom or in the workplace. And I think we need to wrestle with that. We need to wrestle it to the ground. Because we use these technologies all the time. And I think we ought to give kids the tools they need for the tasks at hand. You don't send a kid up a snowy ridge. What does that mean, though? 850. What does that mean?
Oh,
She's
we're
holding
gonna
up a
pause
sign.
for a second.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
but
All right.
One interpretation?
Yeah.
But go ahead and
All
talk
right.
about this. And then
So we don't send kids up a snowy bank with Converse high tops on, right? Let's give them the tools they need to get done what they're supposed to get done. And for heaven's sakes, why don't we design things a little bit more intelligently so that nobody has to be called special. I hate the term special education. And we have almost completely excised it from our lexicon here at the school. We don't do special education here, we are educational specialists. That's what we should all be. That's what we should all do for every kid who's out there. I love this slide because Michael Thompson, I think, really nailed this in almost a kind of a haiku kind of way. What do kids need? They need connections to our teachers and to their friends, and peers in the school. They need recognition for their work and effort. They don't need to be told they're not trying hard enough because they are busting their butts every day. And they need to sense that we know and they are achieving mastery over their skills. This is my granddaughter. I know her grandfather really well. 2nd grade, look at how sad she looks. And you know, she's got this thing, there's reading, there's stuff at recess, there's mathematics that she's having trouble with, and she's just having a terrible time in school, too much stuff, I need a break. She spelled break right, at least that's good, right? That's the way I spell it anyway. You can't think of 2 ways to spell the same word, you're not thinking hard enough. So she, you know, and I said, well, Aria, what's PLP? She looked at me like, what? You don't know what PLP is? And she said, Papa, aren't you like a principal of a school? I said, yeah. She said, well, PLP stands for Personal Learning Project. You don't know that? And this was like a source of huge problems for her. And here's, you know, she told me, I don't need education. And she's got the school running away from her. And look at that angry face. And this is again, someone who's in the middle of 2nd grade. We don't need to do this to kids. We don't need to do this to kids. This is a good enough test I gave when I was just a pup. And Oscar's clearly depressed about school. He's at the back of the bus. He can't get any respect from anybody. He's a 2nd-class citizen, and he knows it in this school. There's no future for him there. I'll just put this on the website.
Yeah. So what we'll do, I just want to take a moment that if you filled out a question, if a question came to mind and you filled it out on an index card, we'll have Sally and Kelsey come around and collect them and bring them up to us. And we'll pause for just a moment so that if you have questions, additional questions that you want to come up with, feel free to write it out. And then I'll ask our final question when we get to sort it out. Okay.
So my guess is we're kind of running out of time. Oh,
Yeah.
this is what happens to me. It happens all the time.
You need an alarm clock, Lou.
That's what we're naming.
You know, I can never figure out how to work the damn thing. I just wake up at 5 or 6 o'clock. It's not a big deal for me. I don't consider it an independent wake-up thing. I just consider it, I'm done with this. I'm done with the sleep thing.
All right. So while we're getting this passed along, one of the things I would love to hear from you, Lou, is in the practice of education, what are you excited about? What's coming down the pipe? What's something that you've seen start to come to fruition?
So what I'm really excited about is finally dealing with the research that goes all the way back to Robert Putnam in his almost unreadable book called Bowling Alone. Anyone read that book? I know, I don't get out much. I love that book. And it is really dense. But what he says in there, and I think we ought to really listen carefully to this, he talks about the dissolution of American society and how isolated we've all become from one another. But he says that what predicts career success and adult civic engagement is not academic attainment. It's participation in extracurricular activities. Now, this is a problem when you have extracurricular activities. And this is also why most LD schools want to end at the 8th grade, Vanessa. Because nobody wants to deal with adolescent boys and the way they celebrate and do whatever they do. But I got to tell you that when you see kids participating in extracurricular activities, theater, dance, sports, building things. Here are kids, looking at Fall in Water, the famous Frank Lloyd Wright house, and they're making their own thing. Again, we're connecting hands with minds. When you see kids performing this kind of stuff, they are doing what Michael Thompson talks about. They're making connections with coaches and peers. They're getting feedback on their performance. They're practicing. They're learning. And also, they are being recognized for the efforts they're putting into things. So the more we can build in these kinds of activities for our kids, I think it bodes very well for their future. because we can de-emphasize the academic stuff that always gets in their way, particularly our kids, and emphasize this. And it can be anything. We have a fishing club, and they drop lines. We stock the thing with fish. It's catch and release. But kids make friends at these clubs, and so kids with social issues, isolation, and so forth do this. And I am very excited about this. You folks at Hawken know all about this, but Lawrence joined Hawken, and probably 150 independent schools from Punahou to Lawrenceville in the United States. And we are looking at a mastery transcript. Instead of the transcript that was developed in 1904, we're now in the Mastery Transcript Consortium. And if your school's not in that consortium, you ought to think about getting into it, because what we're looking at is a transcript that talks about analytical and creative thinking, complex communication, oral and written, leadership and teamwork, digital and quantitative literacy, global perspective, habits of mind, integrity, and ethical decision-making. And instead of a list of courses and hours and grades, you get a spider graph that shows where has this kid spent the most time? What skills and proclivities and affinities have they developed? A much fairer way of looking at a kid, and the kid can put in their participation in fishing club, leadership in a choir, or pitching for the girls' softball team. And I think these are movements that need our support, and they need to be nourished and fed. I also am kind of interested in this, and this is the idea that these may be challenges in school, but school has a very narrow definition of success. When kids get out into the world, these things actually become kind of advantages if they can leverage them that way. Yeah, you're hyperactive in school, but you have high energy output. I could never sit still in school. I mean, I was always being, slapped or hit with a ruler. The nun would hit me with a ruler when I, wasn't paying attention or something. I appreciated it. It brought me back. It refocused me and so forth. And all I wanted was for her not to call home, because I wouldn't get hit with a ruler at home. I'd get hit with a maw that was calloused from hard work in a factory. But, I think our kids do. I don't believe it's a gift. Make sure you know that. If dyslexia is a gift, I want to find the customer service counter and I want to return it. Because I never appreciated having it. I still don't. And I don't think any fourth grade kid thinks of their dyslexia as a gift. So let's not talk about it that way. I do like this notion of agency. And do we have time to play, Emma? Or not?
Sure. Yeah. You want me to pull it up for you?
Yeah, can you do that?
Yeah.
I want, and we only have to listen to about a minute of this. But there's this girl who's in our 7th grade who has the very best way of describing herself that illustrates agency, not self-esteem. I hate that word now. Agency. Agency means I know who I am, I know what my strengths are, I know what my challenges are, and I know what resources I have at my beck and call to help me solve problems.
Are you ordinary or are you extraordinary? Ordinary would mean you do things just like everyone else. Extraordinary means you do things differently. At Lawrence School, I have discovered that I can be extraordinary. But I haven't always thought so. School used to be a difficult place to be. I have ADHD and dyscalculia, which some people call dyslexia of math. A lot of people refer to these as disabilities. I used to believe them. Now I know it only means that I learn differently.
I have ADHD and dyscalculia, which some people call dyslexia of math. Some people refer to these as disabilities. I used to believe them. That's what she says. I used to believe them. Now I know just means I learn differently. That's agency. That's agency. It's not self-esteem. It's not like oh, atta girl, you did this, you did that. And you go on the video on our website, you'll see that she's a wonderful cartoonist. I used to believe that. Now I know it means I learn differently. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, well, there's some questions.
Okay.
And feel free, if you are comfortable just raising your hand, you can too. We're just trying to get to as many as possible. So the first one is, what do you think is the first step to changing a typical independent school design? I'm concerned about the 3 groups or levels of students you mentioned. Right? How do we help students feel more equal in regards to their school performance? What needs to change first? It's pretty loaded.
Wow. No, I think it's a really important question, and I wish I was smart enough to answer it. And it's why I work in an independent school for kids that get washed out of those independent schools. And it's not that I question that kids need to be in those rarefied environments where they really get to be the thoroughbred they are and run the race the way they want to run the race. I don't want to take that away from anybody. But I do think that we do a tremendous amount of damage when we create the impression that everybody's supposed to be able to do that. And that, you know, this myth of the average that Todd Rose did that wonderful TED Talk about and wrote the book, End of Average. I think we ought to pay close attention to that. But, you know, a lot of the pressure is coming from our parents. And our parents have been taught well by who? By us. And I think we need to kind of enlarge and broaden that conversation in a way that embraces more kids and allows them to embrace their kids. And quit expecting that their kids do things like everybody else does. But here's the scary thing about what's happening at independent schools and why I admire what Scott Looney is doing so much. We are, in the independent school world, the NAIS independent school world, I think we've lulled ourselves into a false sense of security because we're getting kids into, you know, the most competitive colleges, and we think that everything we're doing is just wonderful. But I don't think that's going to last very much longer. There'll always be a place for the most selective independent schools. But already a lot of small independent schools are struggling and they're closing. There's a decreasing demographic. Technology is completely changing the way we're doing things. A wonderful article called, you know, Technology, the Trojan Mouse of Education. So, you know, this notion that technology is boring underneath the walls, these calcified things, divisions between departments and age groups and kids, and it's changing the way kids are learning. I mean, you have 40,000 people in a course online, some of them from India, some of them from China, some of them from the United States. Schools will have to change as a result of some of these pressures. So maybe we just watch and wait and see.
And how can we measure growth in current levels without using normative testing or maybe the community model that you talked about? How can we measure this?
Well, you know, we do grades here at Lawrence too, but we combine them with standardized test data. At the lower school, we do you know, the kind of progress monitoring that most of us are now, you know, this interim progress measurement. And they do it, Bill, you do it weekly and bi-weekly, and we're looking at fluency in reading, written expression, and arithmetic at the lower school. At the upper school, we're using NWEA maps, and we're doing 2 to 3 administrations a year so that we can make adjustments to kids' programs. So I do think there's a role for standardized testing. I'm not suggesting we throw out standardized testing. I'm suggesting we use it sensibly in an assessment program that informs both how kids are learning and how the school is doing in terms of its own programming and curriculum development. So I would say you combine both of those things. But, you know, the grading thing is, I'd just like to see that go away. You know, people say, well, what would you replace it with? I'm not sure I would review maybe a narrative, you know, maybe a conference with the teacher, the student, and their parents to talk about, you know, what the course goals are, where the kid is in terms of getting some of those things done. But I think there's a better way to do this than to do the A, B, C, D, F thing. By the way, that started in the meatpacking industry. That's where the first letter grades were given. And even back then, I forget exactly what date it was, but people thought, there's no way you can just grade red meat with those 5 grades, because they differ so much. And you know, if a steak differs that much from another steak, you think kids might be that different? So I just think it's an idea that has served its purpose, and it really should go away.
And I'm going to add to that too, because we frequently provide assessments for students who are in your schools in the CCIS community. And whenever we have your report cards, it's incredibly valuable, because often if I am assessing someone from the public school, I get F, F, A, A, C, D, F. And maybe like a little number that says like good effort, but they have an F. And I'm like, what? And that's all I know.
Yeah.
Where when I get, you know, a report card from Hawken or US or Interzone's board, or, you know, I get a full narrative, which is phenomenal, because then I have an actual picture of this child in each classroom setting, which is speaking to this mastery piece. And then also I think it helps show to the parent, like, I really understand your child, I got your child's back, and I understand both strengths and where we need to work on things to get them to progress to the next level, or, you know, to learn.
Maybe if I got all A's, I'd like grading more. But, you know, I sent a dear colleague of mine my college transcript, and I swore her to secrecy. She was having a conversation with her son, who was kind of struggling with something in college. And I reminded her that D in the grading system in college stands for degree. I can tell you, that's what it stands for.
Well, we actually, at Case, Nicole Pucci was at Case with me too. We had a professor that would purposefully give you a B and tell you B equals PhD. And he, apparently now, he will survey the class, ask everyone who has a 4.0. Everyone who raises their hand, he marks them down and says, you'll be getting a B regardless of what you do. And then you spend your time doing other things, researching, reading, providing, you know, teaching and tutoring, and doing your own like educational pursuits, not just the classwork. So yeah.
And I will confess, I'm the beneficiary in my house. My parents never went beyond the 8th grade. They're Italian. I tell people I'm the beneficiary of low expectations. If I got a C, I was just fine. If I got a D, then you're going to try a little harder. If I brought home a B, I was crown prince. There was nothing I couldn't do in that house. Yeah.
I've always felt that curiosity was a really crucial element for learning. And, you know, I think it's on this question of what independent schools or any school do better, is I think we're not fostering that. I don't think we ask our students to be engaged in their own learning up front as much as is possible, even in a public school where they have maybe more students or resources that are different or whatever. But how many times do you go into a class and start a unit and ask the students to define what they think they might be interested in? It doesn't happen that much. But that's usually what makes people do the extra mile of work or reading or practicing or whatever.
My colleague Rick Lavoie has an interesting comment about that sort of motivation and curiosity thing. I think we get stuck with those words a lot. I think all kids are curious. But, you know, what Rick Lavoie says is he's never met a kid. And, you know, he's someone who was the head at Riverview School in Massachusetts. And he's worked with kids with all kinds of labels. And he says that he never met a kid who didn't want to do his work. He met lots of kids that didn't want to do our work. But, you know, when it comes to the stuff they love, they're curious, they're engaged. They don't need any help figuring that out. But I think our schools have separated kids, have separated the mind from the hands, and we've just created this very dry environment where a lot of kids feel like they have ashes in their mouths the whole day. And they're wondering why, they're not eager to eat more. They're done. They're finished. I do want to show one. Where are my turtles?
Okay.
So, this is Honan in Hawaii. I moved here from Hawaii. This animal is awkward, completely maladapted to the black sand beach. Actually revered in Hawaii because it can live in both environments. But we may draw conclusions about a turtle on the sand that would be completely inaccurate. And, we would, accommodate it. We would ask it to speed up. We would say it's not showing enough interest in the land environment. Maybe it's not curious or motivated or whatever. So all you do is you change the environment and you see a creature that swims powerfully and gracefully, dives down deeper, stays down a long, long time and comes up completely dry. And I think that our job is to get our kids to this environment where they're destined to be. And it may be very different from the activities that we're trying to get them to be interested in school. It might have more to do with what they do after school and activities. But if we remember that our job is to get kids to the sand, to get kids to the sea, off the sand, I think we would do a lot better, particularly for the kids that I'm worried about, who don't learn language intuitively. And then the other thing I wanted to share with you, we should be hanging rainbows for kids. Kids should have a sense of wonder about the world that I think school sometimes strips them of. And we need to get back to, enjoying what we know is beautiful about the world and sharing that with kids rather than creating this anxiety and stress that they all seem to be suffering.